All right, back live tonight, here on In Focus. It's been 8 months since the Financial Action Task Force grey-listed South Africa. This is due to weaknesses with laws meant to prevent money laundering and terrorism financing. Let's talk a little bit more about this and how it affects foreign direct investment. We're joined now by Reputation First Group Managing Director, Tshepo Matseba. Tshepo, good to have you, and thank you very much for your time. You know, in the previous administration, when we spoke of attracting foreign direct investments, right, business would always tell you, well, there's two things that are making investors run away from South Africa. One, policy uncertainty. Two, structural reforms that are not being implemented. But it looks as if now we are adding to that list, including grey listing and energy security being among the things that are coming forward. Are we looking at more issues, I suppose, that are affecting why we are not attracting as much foreign direct investment as we would like to see?
Oh, yes. Good evening, Thabo, and thank you for the opportunity. Yes, grey listing has an impact, and so does the pressing issue around the energy crisis in the country. But you are right. Within grey listing, there are a number of issues, including the extent to which, as a country, we are able to effectively deal with financial crimes, including corruption, issues around state capture, and how state capture has impacted South Africa's image globally in terms of how we are able and capable and willing to deal with corruption as swiftly as we possibly can. And then there's potential for us to be perceived generally around issues of financing terrorism or enabling the space where terrorism can be financed. And when we look at the discussion around the mafia issues on diamonds, for example, that has certainly sent wrong signals that we don't necessarily want to send globally in terms of our capability in dealing with financial crimes. Additionally, therefore, you know, when investors come to a country, they would like to know that their infrastructure is capable of maintaining their business, but also that the environment is safe for leaders and experts to operate, and for customers to operate, and for business to flow. And the level of crime that you see in our country, especially in recent times with the cash in transit heists that are so volatile at the moment, the signals that we are sending globally are those of instability, those of an unpredictable environment. And that's also additionally compounded by the fact that whenever we have an issue in South Africa, we seem to rush to ban buildings, as you've seen in 2021 July. And as a consequence, we've been grey-listed, and we know that the country is doing a number of interventions to get us off the grey list, but that might actually be a little too late when we look at the numbers towards January 2025.
So if, for example, last week we were reporting on this bust that seemed to have happened because of some exceptional intergovernmental cooperation and information sharing under the auspices of the National Joint Energy Safety and Security Priority Committee. I mean, are actions like that beneficial? Do they count towards sending the right kind of message to say we are able to penetrate, for example, code smuggling syndicates that are operating in the country, which by and large seems to indicate that it includes some international players as well?
No, absolutely. So every intervention that South Africa takes to combat crime actually helps. Unfortunately, global headlines are not necessarily, and investors don't occupy themselves with facts about how you are tackling crime in the country, because it's the little issues that are incremental on a daily basis that actually preoccupy headlines. For example, tourists, the German tourist who died sometime a while ago, was killed sometime a while ago in Mpumalanga, for example. And then the level of brazen crime that you see in the city of Johannesburg when people are walking. So when you are talking to a foreign investor, and when we were in Russia, for example, in recent times, recently for the Russia-Africa Summit, people were saying, but you know, your country is so explicit in crime that we're actually even afraid of sending our experts there because we think that people will be killed on a day-to-day basis. So the perceptions actually outweigh the effort that the country is putting to deal with crime. What should happen is that the effort that we put in strategically need to also reflect at grassroots level so that you deal deal with crime holistically and not just on an sort of inverted commas organized crime, sophisticated crimes level, but also dealing with day-to-day what may seem like petty crimes, so that you reduce the levels of contact crimes, because it's those contact crimes like murder and rape that send shivering signals around the world.
Yeah. The question is whether or not we lack the skills and the resources to be able to do this type of work. I mean, of course, there was that scramble to change legislation last minute, but it didn't save us. Of course, we ended up being grey-listed. But it seems changing legislation is one thing, but I suppose there needs to be a great deal of implementing of that legislation that needs to be demonstrated. And the question is whether or not we lack the skills and the resources.
I think South Africa has got the skills and the resources, as we've seen, given that South Africa actually, when you look at our market relative to other markets in emerging markets, we are actually one of the countries where we have robust financial instruments. Our banking and financial services system is functional, sophisticated, and actually on par with competitive markets globally. The issue is for the political will. When you have politics and politicians leading a space that should be dealing with implementation and execution, so that you have a far more predictable environment for investor confidence, you're going to have challenges when you don't have actually political will. And the problem that we have is not at the state functional level. The skill set, especially, you may say that there are skill set issued at municipal level and elsewhere, but overall, as a country, nationally and provincially, we've got the right people, the right skills in terms of competencies. If you look at National Treasury, for example, and you look at the National Prosecuting Authority, the issue is whether we are able to implement as quickly and swiftly as possible. There are so many promises when the current National Director of Public Prosecution was appointed, I think, around 2019, that were promised around actually implementing the outcomes of the recommendations of the State Capture Commission. And to this day, many cases are still hanging, and we are being made more promises, and I think it's a little bit far too late, especially given that we are going towards an election, and South Africa remains on the spotlight. We are a significant player when you look at BRICS, for example, in that environment. And so the extent to which we are failing to implement the resolutions or the recommendations of a legal commission is actually concerning, and it's a key contributor that's delaying us in terms of growth as a country.
The President has dismissed these claims that the recommendations of the state capture are falling on deaf ears. In fact, he says that he was making legislative and institutional changes to reduce the chances of similar acts of corruption being committed, and saying that for example, the establishment of an anti-corruption body that is underway, what do you say, the resourcing of the NPA, that has been done. There's a lot of progress in bringing in integrity, for example, at state-owned enterprises.
No, beyond reasonable doubt. And you want that integrity to result in action, but action in a consistent and speedy manner. And so at a strategic level, the President and probably his team in Cabinet have got plans and programs that they really are driving to reform these institutions. And you've seen some progress in some cases. But overall, the pace of and the speed at which these reforms are being implemented is actually concerning, especially given that the world is watching us. We are on the spotlight. We are hosting the AGOA Summit in a few weeks' time. And that already tells you that South Africa will remain on the spotlight for a while. And you expect, therefore, the relevant institutions, especially the security cluster, to implement reforms and do so speedily. Remember that state capture has named names. They've made recommendations about people who actually have to be asked to come and answer questions. We are going now towards 2024. Then 2024 will go too quickly if we don't start demonstrating actions. And there's a target date for South Africa to be removed from the grey listing of January 2025, around there. Now, if we don't make this progress around demonstrating consistently that corruption is being dealt with, that money laundering is being dealt with quickly, that graft is people are being arrested and their convictions, we can already anticipate problems going towards January 2025.
Yeah. There are some who look at this AGOA thing and they say, well, look, it's not the end of the world if South Africa is expelled from AGOA. How severe would it be? But also, I suppose, what would be the fallout from that? Because other investors might also be looking at what happens with AGOA and they might take the similar actions.
Look, it would be disingenuous for us as a country to say that South Africa will not lose anything if we are expelled, if we were expelled from AGOA. The fact that the summit is being held here demonstrated that South Africa actually has been given more confidence and another lifeline to continue, which means that potentially after the AGOA summit, there's another 10 years of benefit for the country and the Southern African countries. Importantly, remember that with AGOA, we get preferential treatment and preferential procurement around different products. I think around categories around 1,500 categories of products that we can procure from the US. So we get better benefits, if you may say, discounts. And that's a significant benefit. Does that mean that without AGOA, South Africa will not survive? Absolutely not. Remember that there are other instruments that are already in place and agreements between South Africa and the US, given that the US is actually South Africa's second biggest trading partner. There are other agreements that are in place which enable South Africa to benefit in any case from trading with the United States. But to say that there's no benefit here will not be very wise. Note also that the US is also gaining from the transaction, so it's not a one-way stream. Without South Africa, the US is unlikely to actually create the kind of impact on the African continent, especially in the Southern African region, without South Africa. So it's important. It's a mutually, of course, beneficial relationship, and it's one that we should embrace, I think, as it enables us to continue to remain the gateway to key markets on the African continent.
Wars, of course, are playing somewhat of a role here. We know that the AGOA situation, what threatened it, of course, is our support for Russia as a country in the Russia-Ukraine war, and that Simonstown landing, which was quite a big issue, or docking, shall we say. And now we've got the Israel-Palestine issue. Do you think that is also going to play into this question of attracting foreign direct investment?
Oh, yeah. So we are going to watch this very closely. So unfortunately, as a country of our magnitude, we cannot distance ourselves from global politics and regional politics. And we know that, the Americans have, of course, already said that they are standing with Israel, irrespective of the circumstances. And similarly, South Africa has come out openly through President Cyril Ramaphosa and Naledi Pandor, Minister Pandor, to say that they are with Palestine on this one. And that's for many historical reasons. South Africa has been friends with Palestine for many, many years, for decades, perhaps for some may say for centuries. But the extent to which that affects foreign direct investment is a debatable issue, because for FDI is managed through different mechanisms, trade is managed through different mechanisms, and there are separate discussions in terms of the sovereignty of the country. What may be an issue in the short term is that there may be fueling tensions between South Africa and the Western, what you may call them, powerhouses, especially given our stance and posture on Russia as a friend of Russia for many, many years, despite the fact that from a trade and investment perspective, Russia is not a significant contributor actually to South Africa's economy when you just look at the numbers and then in terms of imports and exports. And so it will be interesting to watch, but they are separate, I believe, bilateral platforms where trade is engaged and I don't believe that the immediate actions that South Africa has taken, or position that is taken, will adversely impact investment in the short term. But perhaps in the long term, there might be issues around trust. And trust in the world of investments and in the world of bilateral discussions is very, very important.
Tshepo Matseba, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much for coming on Reputation First Group Managing Director there. That is Tshepo Matseba.